Hello, everyone. I have an incredible panel of amazing humans joining me today to discuss how COVID-19 relates to the climate emergency. Here we have musician and activist Moby, activist and Academy Award-winning actor Joaquin Phoenix, the physician and author of the book How to Survive a Pandemic, Overcoming COVID-19 and Preventing the Next Deadly Outbreak, Dr. Michael Greger, as well as Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, a risk and behavioral scientist who is an expert on infectious disease and the author of Adapt to Thrive. And I am your moderator today, Haile Thomas, a 19-year-old vegan, wellness, and compassion activist. Thank you all so much for sharing your time with us, so let's jump right into it. All right, so the first question is for Dr. Chakraborty. What exactly is zoonotic disease?
This is a great starting off point. So we know from those that are in the infectious disease surveillance and mitigation community that there's potentially up to 1.67 million, and I just want you to take a second to take that in, potential viruses that reside within animals around the world. And that's something that the infectious disease community has kept an eye on for decades. And none of this outbreak around COVID-19 was a surprise. This community has said all along that this was a not if, but when situation, because we know that there's a couple trends that are in place. There is the planet warming, there is increasing population on the planet, there's urbanization, and all of these factors result in encroaching of habitats, right? So when you have animals and humans interacting in ways that haven't historically been the case, you're bound to potentially let some of these pathogens, viruses, out of where they have just been residing and not hurting anyone, which is their animal host, and then making the jump, potentially mutating, getting into humans, and then you have human to human transfer. So that jump from animal to human is what we refer to as zoonotic disease transfer. And that is something that we as humans have spurred on and brought into existence. It's our bad human behaviors that have caused this engagement that would naturally never have happened otherwise. We are the ones who have allowed these viruses to emerge.
Wow, and I think it's really fascinating that, this is my first time ever even hearing of zoonotic disease, and unfortunately, in this pandemic, but I think it's really fascinating that it's been connected to pandemics for so long, yet the public is generally not so aware of it. So, Dr. Greger, can you explain a little bit more of how COVID-19 really got started?
Sure. COVID-19 is the third deadly coronavirus outbreak since the turn of the century. All three appear to have originated in bats, but to jump to humans seem to have required a stepping stone species, an intermediate host animal that bridges the gap between bats and people. For SARS, in that case, the animal was a civet cat, a wild animal sold in live animal markets and restaurants in China. The SARS coronavirus jumped from civets to people and then spread human to human, killing 1 in 10 of the 8,000 people it infected. In response, China closed the live animal markets and banned the sale of civets for a few months, and then they were back on the menu. Had the ban on wet markets been made permanent, we might not now be suffering the worst pandemic in a century. Because now we have SARS coronavirus 2, the cause of COVID-19, traced back to the same source, the wild animals traded in these live animal wet markets. In this case, pangolins, an endangered anteater species prized for its flesh and other body parts. Thankfully, COVID-19 is only killing about 1 in 200 people it infects, whereas SARS was 20 times deadlier, killing 1 in 10. And so COVID-19 may just be a dress rehearsal for the next plague unless we shut down these markets for good.
Wow, that's definitely terrifying, but I think there is a certain power kind of behind this, that our individual actions can potentially change the course of pandemics caused by zoonotic disease. So Moby and Joaquin, I know you are both vegans, and for multiple reasons, I'm sure, as veganism is so interconnected. Can you, either of you, explain kind of really why veganism is so important, and especially Moby, how climate change is connected to your veganism.
Sure. I mean, I think it's also worth putting things in a historical context. And please, Dr. Greger, correct me if I'm mistaken, but the nature of pandemics is that pandemics are zoonotic. You know, going back to Ebola, the Spanish flu, the plague, HIV, these all started with animal hosts and largely started with humans using animals for food. You know, that's the original vector for almost every pandemic going back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So there's nothing in any way surprising about the current tragedy. And bringing it to climate change, because the two are very much related. I mean, animal agriculture is the third leading cause of climate change. You know, you can discuss percentages, whether it's 20%, 30%. It's hard to come up with such a gigantic number, but it is easy and safe and accurate to say that the production of meat and dairy is the third leading cause of climate change, and you cannot effectively or successfully begin to address climate change without ending the use of meat and dairy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, I think it's this very highly personal yet universal experience of our lifestyles directly affecting the overall experience. So Joaquin, could you speak to really your personal reasons and spiritual reasons behind going vegan?
Sure. Well, first, thank you all for your work that you do. It's so inspiring. For me, I was very young, and I witnessed the slaughter of hundreds upon hundreds of fish, and I was immediately struck. I had a visceral and emotional reaction to it, and it seemed wrong. And I instantly knew that I didn't want to contribute or support to that kind of violence against another sentient being. I was willing to take on any kind of challenges that decision made, experiencing ridicule in school, being challenged by my friends' parents for my beliefs. But I knew that it was something that just felt right to me. And this was before we really learned about the devastating effects that the meat and dairy industry has upon the climate. This is before we really knew about the health benefits of veganism. So my veganism and my advocacy for animals is something that has evolved and changed throughout the years. But as you spoke about, Haile, we realize that so many of these issues are interconnected. And the way that I can make a dent in this is simply by abstaining, right? By not supporting the meat and dairy industry, I'm having a profound and positive impact on mitigating climate change. And I'm not contributing to the pain and suffering of billions and trillions of animals every year when I have alternatives to sustain myself.
Yes, I think that you're an incredible example of someone who just walks the talk, but also proof that our stories and journeys with our lifestyle choices can truly influence and inspire others. I mean, my generation is already just hyper aware of all of the issues going on in the world and wants to engage in lifestyles and choices that can hopefully heal our planet. But it's really cool to see little kids super repulsed by anything that has a face, just starting out on the jump. So I think that ultimately those personal choices are really where a lot of power lies. I do want to dive a little bit more into the specific connections between pandemics like this and climate change. So Dr. Chakraborty, could you elaborate on that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, we have on a warming planet that is filling up rapidly with people. We're talking about 9.8 billion people by mid-century. And that interaction with the natural environment should be respectful. Historically, it has been. But as you begin to encroach on these habitats and interact with animals that naturally you would never have, and then force those animals to interact with one another in these wet markets and in wildlife trade, that is when you start creating these breeding grounds for viruses. It's, if you wanted to create a mutant virus that was going to be not just highly transmissible, but highly lethal, this would be exactly the way to do it, would be to create these markets or any sort of environment where you would have potential viruses interacting with one another that you wouldn't naturally ever see occurring in the environment. And so we've done that. We've done that as humans on this planet. And it's because of human behavior that the planet is warming, and it's because of human behavior that these infectious diseases are emerging. The good news there is because we are behind climate change and we are behind the increasing frequency and intensity of infectious disease outbreaks, it means we can also turn the tide on it. And that's why what we're doing now is so critical, having these conversations and saying that this is not a virus that was generated in a lab somewhere. We can tell that from looking at the genome sequence. And these are viruses that very much, the accountability rests squarely with human beings on the planet. We have to respect the natural environment. And this is the time when we have the world's attention, and this is so critical, is when we change human behaviors. So what Moby and Joaquin just said in regards to being vegan, this is the time we can actually make some sort of widespread change that becomes normal. And while we have the world's attention, we need to act.
Yes, I love that. That was so empowering. I already feel like I can approach this with a whole different energy. I think that this time is providing an opportunity for us to be really introspective and think of our lifestyles and the ways that we can adapt and change for the collective good. So I love that message. Dr. Greger, could we go into a little bit more of the specifics on what exactly makes these wet markets so dangerous?
Yeah, because you have multiple species mixing under crowded, stressful conditions, which impair their immune system. In terms of what happened with the pangolins, because their demand for their meat is a delicacy, and their scales, the coverings on their skin for traditional Chinese medicine, pangolins have become the most trafficked mammal in the world. Now, in response to COVID-19, the Chinese government once again enacted a temporary ban on the sale of wild animal meat. But even if it were made permanent, there's a glaring loophole, and that the ban exempts the use of wild animals for traditional Chinese medicine. So while it's currently illegal to eat pangolin meat, it's not illegal to eat other pangolin parts. However, the next coronavirus may come from pigs, not pangolins. In 2016, another new coronavirus arose in China, SADS, S-A-D-S, a bat-to-pig virus that devastated industrial pig farms in the same region in China where SARS had broken out. So while pangolin populations are in decline, we produce more than 1 billion pigs a year, nearly half of which in China alone, raising the concern that the next pandemic may arise from domesticated rather than wild animals. Take the last pandemic, swine flu in 2009, arose not from some backwater wet market in Asia, but was largely made in the USA on industrial pig farms in the United States. So we may be one bushmeat meal away from the next HIV, one pangolin plate away from the next killer coronavirus, and one factory farm away from the next deadly flu.
Goodness, that's actually a great transition to my next question, which is really the connections between traditional animal agriculture and climate change. Because I think the wet markets might seem far-fetched to some of us, but the animal agriculture that we have, here in the States is also pretty interesting. So Moby, could you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, it's funny. I had a conversation with Al Gore after An Inconvenient Truth was released. And I asked Vice President Gore, who I love him, I asked him why in An Inconvenient Truth, the book and the movie, he didn't really mention the role of animal agriculture. And he was very clear. He said, because the role of meat and dairy production in climate change is the truth that's too inconvenient for most people. I mean, years ago, a decade or more ago, the UN IPCC released a report saying that approximately 20% of climate change is a result of meat and dairy production. And even if that number were accurate, that would be massive. I mean, to put it in context or perspective, that's more than every car, bus, boat, truck, plane, ship, etc. on the planet. But their methodology was actually kind of restricted, and they really focused more on emissions, looking at, methane emissions from livestock. What they didn't really incorporate, because the data wasn't that available, was rainforest deforestation. And we know now that 90% of rainforest deforestation is a result of meat and dairy production. So if you include that, the role of animal agriculture, or as I like to say, meat and dairy production, to make it a lot more clear, is possibly responsible for up to 50% of climate change.
Wow, yeah. I think that that's something that we all should be thinking about in terms of the ways we support those industries and how we can learn more about it. But I really appreciate those gems there. As we were looking into this zoonotic disease, I was seeing a lot of information about bats. So can we talk about that, Dr. Chakraborty? Because humans are encroaching on their territory and that climate change is causing disruption, it seems that bats have also become a huge danger in terms of pandemics. So can you help us understand why?
Yes, and it's not just bats. Remember, mares came from camels in the Arabian Peninsula. Monkeys produced HIV from Africa. Ebola is also from Africa. One critical takeaway that I want to make sure is really emphasized is that it does not matter where geographically an infectious disease emerges. There's unique ecosystems around the world that are going to be in Southeast Asia or Africa, North America even. What we know is that it's the increased human activity with these animals that result in this potential zoonotic disease transfer. And it's exotic animals. It's animals that we haven't interacted with historically that potentially have a plethora of viruses residing within them, again, causing no harm to their host. And honestly, if I was coronavirus, I would be mad at humans. Why did you bother me? I don't cause any harm to the bats that I live in, right? I know it's weird to think of it like that, but we are messing with the natural environment. And bats have a unique microbiome of magnitudes of different microorganisms that reside within them and are unique, not too unique compared to other animals that also have massive microbiomes that result in these potential viruses and microorganisms from getting out. But we have studied bats for decades, and we know that they are the origin of coronaviruses. And so this is, again, information that has been known by the infectious disease community, by epidemiologists in the field. We're talking about those who are risking their lives to survey these potential sources of outbreaks. So you have field epidemiologists going into bat caves and monitoring and studying the different viruses, which is how we know there's potentially up to 1.67 million that are just residing in some animals, mainly bats, that could, through exposure and interaction with humans, be released. The infectious disease community does not consider coronavirus a lethal, in terms of mortality, disease. This is still considered a mild disease. So imagine if we had a highly transmissible and highly lethal virus. It's our responsibility to prevent that type of virus from ever emerging, from ever seeing the light of day. We need to be proactive in not creating and engaging in bad human behaviors that would release that disease X, is what we refer to, both highly transmissible and highly lethal. And we can do that. We can learn from COVID-19 and prevent something much worse from ever coming out. This really could have been much worse.
Yes, thank you for that. So in regards to our personal health, for instance, how is obesity tied to bad outcomes with COVID-19? Dr. Greger, could you explain?
Yeah, those with severe obesity, 7 times the odds of ending up on a ventilator with COVID-19. That means weighing on average about 215 pounds for an average height American, 5'6". But even just being overweight puts you at risk. Those with a body mass index of 28, which is about 175 pounds at the average height, used to multiply your odds 6-fold in terms of a severe COVID-19 course. So 6 times the odds at BMI of 28. And in the United States, the average BMI is over 29, right? So that's maybe one of the reasons why the United States currently has the highest death count in the world.
So then how can a plant-based diet help reverse or control issues that might contribute to worse outcomes with COVID-19? And Moby, I'd love for you to explain about this, because many of the conditions that make COVID-19 worse, like obesity, heart disease, hypertension, and type 2 diabetes, can be controlled or reversed with a plant-based diet. And actually my family, we were able to do that with my dad for type 2 diabetes. So I would love to find out more from you on how we can reverse these things with plant-based diet.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously I'm not a doctor, and Dr. Greger knows this inside and out. So if I say anything that's like too far afield, by all means, step in and correct me. But my understanding is one of the best, if not the only ways of either protecting yourself from a virus or having a sort of like mildly benign experience with the virus is to strengthen your immune system, is to overall be healthy. And that involves eating a whole food plant-based diet, you know, especially focusing on phytonutrients, you know, antioxidants, not in pill form, but in plant form. I mean, there's one particular type of antioxidant called anthocyanins, which are easy to identify because they're red and purple. You know, it's red grapes, it's red cabbage, it's red chard, it's in other blueberries as well. And these have like, they strengthen your immune system, they reduce inflammation, because one of the things that's killing people is inflammation response gone haywire. And also these anthocyanins and other, you know, phytonutrients and antioxidants have remarkable antiviral qualities as well.
Yes, and I think that the power of plants even goes beyond the physical benefits. Joaquin, can you speak to the spiritual and mental strengths that being plant-based has brought you? I think that so many people believe that going vegan will make them weak, or that they might not be able to bring their best energy into the world, but you have done that tenfold. So can you really just explain that personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my veganism has galvanized and increased my capacity to fight injustice. It makes me aware of so many things. It extends far beyond just not killing animals. So I've experienced a great benefit in my own personal life. It doesn't feel, I think a lot of times people wonder whether you're taking something away from humanity by focusing on animals. And to me, I've had the opposite experience. It makes me more conscious and aware and thoughtful and compassionate. And that extends to people and to humans and to the environment.
Yes, I think that's so beautiful. It really creates a holistic view, and it's awesome to see that manifested through your justice for animals and for the environment to just continue to blossom. So we all very much appreciate it and all the work that everyone does. So Dr. Greger, can we go back to the topic of COVID-19? I think me and my friends and the entire world is wondering, is COVID here to stay?
COVID-19 is likely here to stay until we achieve what's called herd immunity, meaning that we have a critical portion of the populace immune to the virus. An infection can only burn through a population if there are enough susceptible hosts for the viral sparks to kind of jump from one person to the next. But immune individuals who can't get or transmit the virus act as like fire breaks to slow the spread, like control rods in a nuclear reactor to break the chains of transmission. And this is accomplished through, ideally, mass vaccination. Vaccines are a way to kind of fight fire with fire, using the virus to fight the virus by generating the benefits of infection, immunity, without the risks, disease and death. Without a vaccine, herd immunity is only achieved the hard way through mass infection.
Okay, so if this is the case, then, and we know that these wet markets are dangerous and that the practices with animal agriculture aren't really beneficial right now, what would a world without animal agriculture look like, Dr. Greger?
Well, people would be eating food that's not just tasty, delicious, but would be healthier for themselves and better for global health, both from a climate risk standpoint and from a pandemic risk.
Amazing. And I think that totally connects to my next question of really explaining this One Health approach to sustainability and moving forward. So Dr. Chakraborty, could you dive into this for us?
Absolutely. And this is what we need to realize is we don't live in a silo. Human beings are not in any way isolated from the natural environment and from animals. So when we think about health, human health, we need to think about the relationship to the environment and environmental health and the relationship to animals, animal health. This is a One Health is ultimately what this all moves up and explains. That is the approach to take, is One Health of the environment, the animals and human beings. And if we think of it that way, and if we're not complacent when there isn't an outbreak, think about it, when there isn't anything happening, people kind of go about their daily business without ever being worried. And it's once an outbreak emerges that there is this hysteria and this panic. And not to say that it isn't well realized, because this is a very dangerous risk that has come into our global ecosystem. Nobody is isolated from it. Nobody's immune from it at the moment. And so we need to not be complacent when there isn't an outbreak happening and take the steps we need to be proactive and prepared for inevitably when another disease does emerge. We need to improve our behaviors, and we need to respect and engage with animals and the environment as a One Health approach and prepare ourselves, because as of now, even with our best efforts, we know the impacts we are going to be experiencing as the planet warms. We're going to try and keep it below a threshold, but there are impacts associated with even 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. We know that that's coming, and that knowledge is power. We know that that's going to result in increased infectious disease, and that knowledge is power. So let's take action now while we have the world's attention, and not forget just how bad this was a few months into us becoming less susceptible, us having the vaccinations that Dr. Greger talked about. That doesn't mean we should forget, because this will inevitably happen again.
Yes, yes. I am just like blown away by all of you. This has been so informative, and I am sad to close this up, but I'm excited to hear what you all have to say in regards to a little thought experiment for everyone. So I'd love to hear from each of you. What does our collective future look like if we don't change course and correct climate change? And what would it look like if we do? Anybody can jab at this one.
I'll jump in, and I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I feel like if we don't change course, if we keep behaving collectively as if our actions don't have consequences, and we keep behaving as if there's an infinite supply of resources for us, maybe this is hyperbole, but it's what I believe. It's like everything that we know, everything that we love, everything that we care about will simply go away. You know, you cannot have any version of society and civilization that we've become accustomed to without a stable climate. You know, and one thing that is so exasperating is it's easy to fix. I mean, people might say like, oh, but you know, all these vested interests. It's like, it's real easy to fix climate change. Stop using animals for food, stop using oil, stop using coal and natural gas. There, done. We created the problem, we can fix it. It's just that our politicians work for the corporations who benefit from the status quo. We need a complete paradigm shift, and we need to end those industries that are destroying the only home that we have.
Yes, so powerful. Any other visions, hopefully, of a good future? Something we can look forward to if we change course.
Well, I'd like to emphasize something Dr. Chakraborty said, and that is, as devastating as this pandemic is, it really could have been so much worse. This pandemic is like a dry run, a fire alarm to kind of awake us out of our complacency. You know, there are bird flu viruses out there, H5N1, H7N9, killing upwards of 50% of the people it infects. Imagine a virus like that explosively spreading from human to human. Consider a pandemic 100 times worse than COVID-19, one with a fatality rate of not 1 in 200, but 1 in 2 dead. But the good news is, whether we're talking coronaviruses or influenza viruses, there's something we can do about it. And just as, eliminating the exotic animal trade and live animal markets may go a long way towards, preventing the next coronavirus pandemic, reforming the way we raise animals may forestall the next killer flu.
Wow. And Dr. Chakraborty, what would the world look like if we made the necessary changes?
So I study human behavior, and I'm a huge proponent of us having control over our natural environment in a way that is positive. We do not have to keep going down this track. We've learned just in COVID-19 how reduced consumption has had some really positive impacts on the environment. And so it means it can be done. We can do this. And that's something we really need to take away as a positive from this COVID-19 outbreak, and realize, check our consumption patterns and see what can we actually change going forward right now to ensure a future that, okay, we might be giving up some comforts. And that's a lot of what I hear from those that are resistant to some of these behavioral changes that are going to be required widespread globally. And that resistance is, I don't want to give up my luxury and my comfort. But come on, we are talking about a future that is easier, brighter, and better than anything we've ever experienced as a species on this planet. Our human ingenuity, the technology, the science advancement, that is all coming together to a point where we're able to connect during COVID-19. Imagine if this happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago. We wouldn't have had the ability to physically distance. It would have also been socially distancing. But now, because of technology, it's really just physical distancing. And we need to hammer that in and realize we can change our consumption behaviors and look forward to a future that is actually healthier and more connected than it's ever been. We can go outside, not worry about breathing in the air, not worry about our houses being washed away because of sea level rise and flooding, not worry about wildfire taking out entire communities of people in Australia, California, around the globe. This is a better future if we change our patterns and our behavior. That's what we have to look forward to.
Yes, and luckily I feel like we are all starting to really see this vision, want to bring it to light, and especially my generation having inherited this damaged planet. Joaquin, can you speak to how older generations can support us in our activism and that we can truly make this movement intergenerational?
Well, that's funny because I was going to ask you, how can we support youth in your activism? What do you need?
Whoa, the microphone just like flipped
Right.
away.
How does it feel?
Plot twist. Oh, for sure. I think that there's an amazing power that we have to level the playing field. We're all having an experience that we're sharing, and we all have wisdom, no matter what spectrum we are on of our age gaps. And I think that it's important for us to approach this knowing that it's our future collectively, and that regardless if you're inheriting it or not, you're going to live on it. And so we need to all come together and break down those ego barriers and things that prevent us from learning and growing together. So just being able to have open conversations like this, and to be a young person in the midst of incredible experts and activists, is insane to me, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for the plot twist and opportunity to put out an olive branch to older generations. And with that, I just want to close and thank you all so much for your insights on zoonotic disease, climate change, plant-based diets, and your experiences, because I think this combination of wisdom but also relatability is so important for us to make a change. So thank you.
Thank you.